The Kuta Sikha is Chelek Tazayin Boy Yud Shevat, page 129 in the Sefer Lili Nishmis Reb Yosef Ben Yamin Ben Reb Menashe Kaltman. What a fascinating Sikha we have. It's on the one hand, it's a Sikha about Chametz on Pesach, but on the other hand, as you will see, it is a Sikha about Rebbe and Chassid. Boy Yud Shevat. Let's jump right in. It's a Sikha about Minik Chasidim as it is understood through the lens of Nigla the Torah of Halacha. Kedusha's Meruchami had more Balai Lulav and Eintik in Shabbos. The Friedrich Rebbe, who was the Balai yard site of this Shabbos, which means that the Shabbos that this Sikha was printed, the year that this Sikha was printed, Yud Shvat was on Shabbos, as it was on the first Yud Shvat, Tavshin Yud, which was also on Shabbos. And of course, this year that we are learning the Sikha together, also Yud Shvat is on Shabbos. And the Friedrich Rebbe shared the following story. Hat erzählt, als wenn sein Vater, Kedusha's hat murmur Hashabnish Maseiden, hat angeheben gehen in Cheder, when the father of the Friedrich Rebbe, the Rebbe Rashab, began to go to Cheder as a young boy, as a 3-year-old boy approximately, hat noch der Rebbe Tzemach Tzedek gelebt. The Rebbe, the Tzemach Tzedek, who was the Zayda, the grandfather of the Rebbe Rashab, was still alive. The Rebbe Rashab was born in Tafreish Chof Aleph, 1860. The Rebbe, the Tzemach Tzedek, passed away in Tafreish Chavav, 1866. So there was about 5.5 years between the birth of the Rebbe Rashab and the Petira, the Istalkus of the Tzemach Tzedek. Und hat dann beim Reinführen in Cheder zugeworfen Zuckerkiss und dabei gesagt, that Tzemach Tzedek threw candies at the Rebbe Rashab as he was being inducted into Cheder. And he said, as Malach Michael hat ihm das geworfen, and said that these candies came from Malach Michael. He does by him sehr neskabel geworden. The young Rebbe Rashab accepted this literally. Und hat nicht gewollt aufessen die Zuckerkiss and didn't want to eat the candy. Weil das einen bei ihm gewesen sehr tired because they were so precious to him. Erev Pesach is given der Minig Vedic zu sein, die Keschnes von den kleinen Kinder. As Pesach approached, it was the minig, it was the custom, as the Alter Rebbe writes in Shulchan Aruch, to check the pockets of the children over the course of the year. They may have put something into their pockets that is chametz. Hat jetzt nach Tzedek gerufen dem Taten und hat gefragt, wo hat die Zuckerkiss? So at that time, the Tzemach Tzedek checked on the Rebbe Rashab, asked him, where do you keep the candies? Hat sie demot gemusst aufessen, and the Rebbe Rashab was then compelled to eat the candies. Von dem Sipur, wie von alles Sipuren von der Beseinen des Jeno, befragt das Sipur wegen dem, was hat passiert, mit Basei allein, kämen herausnehmen, kam heraus. From such a story, as all of the stories that were told to us by the Rebbes, especially a story that is about one of the Rabbeim, we could derive several different types of lessons. Nicht nur in Inyan HaChinuch, wie dort Messiahim, otazach Chinuch darf mir haben. Not just in the area of chinuch, as the Friedrich Rebbe, when he tells over the story, he says, this is the type of chinuch that we have to have. So clearly this is a lesson in chinuch. Was is mudgis beparshosenu benegel Pesach, v'igal televincha v'geimar v'yakish al-chapincha geimar, which is emphasized in this week's parsha, where the parsha tells us to relate the story of Pesach to our children, and if our children ask, we should answer them, which emphasizes the importance of chinuch. So not only in the area of chinuch, and also various halachas that are connected to chametz, which is also a matter that is discussed in this week's parsha. Also in the halachas of chametz, there is also a lesson that can be learned from the story. And right away, we're going to ask a question. Why? Everyone knows before Pesach, we go to the Rav, and we empower the Rav to sell our chametz for us. Why couldn't the candies just get sold with the chametz? That's the question that Rebbe is going to address right away. Given as a tire, nicht gewollt aufessen, since the candies were so precious to the Rebbe Rashab, that he didn't want to eat them, und sie seien doch Tage, and they were truly something precious. Because they were given to him by the Tzemach Tzedek, who was the Rebbe. So why did the Tzemach Tzedek insist that the Rebbe Rashab eat the candies before Pesach? und hat nicht gelost, sie abbieten, weiter durch Verkäufen sie zusammen mit Kol HaChametz, and did not allow him to save the candies for after Pesach by selling them with the chametz. Ubifrat, as man gefindt as Noga Bagdeli Yisrael b'shaychas u'shirayim was iflegem akumim von atzadik, and especially since we find this conduct by other Gedeli Yisrael with regards to shirayim. Literally, shirayim means leftovers, but in the context of the Sikha, it means something that was received from the tzaddik. As Eibes is given a zach was had chametz, and if it was a shirayim, if it was a type of food or drink that contained chametz, das verkauft b'mechiras chametz. The Rebbe brings in the Ha'ara one example of Rabbeinu HaKadosh Meirot in Ziyah, who would sell something that was chametz, which he received from his Rebbe. So why did the Rebbe Rashab not? Why did the Tzemach Tzedek not have these candies sold in the chametz? With the chametz, rather, and then the Rebbe Rashab can keep them after Pesach. Since the Tzemach Tzedek did not advise him to do this, so we seemingly can derive that the Tzemach Tzedek held that this case was different. That this case you couldn't sell the candies with the chametz. Why? For two reasons that the Rebbe suggests. Das Osser, will doch die Sache zurückbekommen nach Pesach, und ist Reutze bekiyumei von dem Chametz. There is a concept in Halacha called, specifically in the Gemara, called Reutze bekiyumei, that a person, even if he doesn't own the Chametz, but he wants the Chametz to exist after Pesach, he wants it to exist so that way he can have it after Pesach, that is a problem. And in this case, the Rebbe Rashab would be Reutze bekiyumei. Even if he would sell it, he would still want it to exist so he could take it back after Pesach. That might be the problem here, which is why the Tzemach Tzedek asked him or told him rather to eat it. Beis, or another suggestion. As helped it came akum. In this case, it would not have helped the fact that it was sold to a goy. The fact that we sell the chametz is considered keharama. It looks like you're cheating the system, because the whole purpose of selling it is only really to get it back after Pesach. So it seems somewhat dishonest. So even though the Chachamim permitted the concept of mechiras chametz, of selling it, even if we have in mind to receive the chametz back after, to buy it back after Pesach, and lechatchila you're allowed to sell it lenachri hamakiri yumiyudai, to a guy who he knows, who is an acquaintance of his, even though he knows that he's not going to touch it during Pesach. He's going to watch it for him over Pesach, and then he's going to sell it back to him. Because the sale technically is only a sale midrabanan. Because midoiraisa, since we bring mafkir the chametz, we're saying kol chamira v'chamia levi hefker kafra da'ara. Since you're being mafkir the chametz, midoiraisa, you already fulfilled your mitzvah of not owning the chametz. It's just that Chachamim were afraid, as we're going to see later in the Sikha, that hefker is not good enough, so they demanded something more than that. So therefore, the Chachamim said you could sell it, and even though it's keha'arama, even though it seems a little bit, I don't know how to say karama in English, but karama means a little bit like it looks like it's dishonest. Nevertheless, since the whole sale is only midrabanan, they accepted it. Benitten die dan aber is the mechira an inyan fun harama nikeres. Over here, because the Rebbe Rashab wanted it so badly, and this sale is being done specifically in order to keep it for after Pesach, so it seems like a much more obvious harama. It's much more which as it's written in the Haris and is explained at length in the Alter Rebbe Shulchan Aruch, harama nikeres is a problem. If it's an obvious harama, if you do something that's very clearly a harama, that will be a problem. Here, because of the fact that the Rebbe Rashab wanted it so much, the sale is only to be able to get it back after Pesach. For example, it's another type of chametz, and you sold the chametz and he gave you back something else that was the value of the chametz, and you could go buy new chametz with it. You didn't have a problem with it. But here he wanted specifically this very same candy. This was the candy that came from the Tzemach Tzedek, and he wanted this specifically. So the harama is much more obvious. And it possibly the Tzemach Tzedek holds that in this case the Chachamim did not allow the harama, the mechira, to work because it's too obviously a harama, and therefore he said to eat it. However, the Rebbe refutes this. Both of these points. The first point was that it was Reitze B'Kiyumai, that the fact that he wants it to exist over Pesach is a problem. The second point was that it was Ha'arama Nikeres, it was an obvious Ha'arama, obvious cheat, and therefore it's a problem, and Chachamim would not accept it. Both of these points are to be refuted. Aleph, that Alter Rebbe, der Motnet in Shulchan Aruch, the Misa Reitze B'Kiyumai B'Chametz Pesach. Nowhere in Shulchan Aruch does the Alter Rebbe refer specifically to Reitze B'Kiyumai as a standalone problem. If the person has the chametz in his possession, chas v'shalom, or if the mechira wasn't a good mechira, or there's another situation, then it's a problem. But if the chametz is not in his possession, the very fact that it's roitze b'kiyumai, the Alter Rebbe does not define that as a problem, as an iser, as a prohibition on Pesach. Beis ledas roiv hapoiskim befrat ledas admur azakin is mechiras chametz a mechira gemura beoifen as ifarhit oich von zuever sein auf baliro balimot zeich deiraisa. There's various different ways and different processes that were done over the years to sell chametz. In certain cases, the chametz was a milveh; it was a loan. The way it was done was that the chametz was sold to the guy, but the guy could not afford to pay for all of it. So the money that he owed back was a loan to him until he either pays it back or gives it. Either pays the loan or gives it back. So if it's a milva, if it's a loan, then it's a little bit more complicated whether it suffices to fulfill the requirements of not owning the chametz on Pesach. But according to the Alter Rebbe and to most other poskim, when you sell it with a mechira gemura. It's a total sale. We'll see later that Rebbe mentions in the Sikha that according to the Alter Rebbe, the sale of chametz is done with an Arav Kablon, with a guarantor, which just strengthens the fact that this is a total and complete sale. And therefore, it doesn't just cover the dirabanan that after a person makes it hefker, he sells it as well, just to make sure that he's not over by Bal Yimotzer. But because this chametz is not included necessarily in the fact that you're being mafkired. You're being mafkired the chametz that for some reason didn't make it into the sale. But this chametz that you're selling is not in the hefker, because this mechira is a total mechira, even midairaisa, and therefore it covers everything. So there's no problem of harama. Harama, which harama nikeres would be a problem, is only if the mechira wasn't a complete mechira. But if you do a full-fledged sale where he totally purchased it from you, and you even went through an order of kablan, so there's no question if a meshicha could be if meshicha could be kaina by a non-Jew. So you did everything right, and especially the way we do it today, where we do various different forms of kinyanim to make sure to cover all of our bases. So this chametz now belongs to a guy. There's no problem of harama. It's certainly not a problem of harama nikeres. So certainly that cannot be the reason why the Tzemach Tzedek would say to the Rebbe Rashab to eat the candy. So we have a question. So we back to our original question: why did the Tzemach Tzedek not sell the candies with the rest of the chametz? In Siv Gimel and Daled, the Rebbe is going to suggest, and then explain why not. But the Rebbe is going to suggest that even if for some reason the Tzemach Tzedek didn't want to sell the chametz, he could have possibly advised the Rebbe Rashab to be mafkir the chametz, to render the chametz hefker, which means to make it ownerless. The person says it's hefker, it's not mine. The Rebbe is going to suggest that even if hefker by itself is a problem, as he's going to explain, but if you make it hefker and you take it out of your possession, you put it out on the street, then you've covered all of your bases as well, and that should have worked. And the question is going to be, why did the Tzemach Tzedek not advise the Rebbe Rashab to be mafkir the chametz? Let's see it inside. In dem erzählten Fall gekannt gefunden einander Eitze wie zu halten ganz dem chametz. Seemingly, we could have found another solution to retain the chametz. Nit ankum to mechiras chametz lein Yehudi without having to rely on selling it to a guy. And what would be that solution? Mafkir zayin dem chametz koydem zman yisurei. To make it hefker, to relinquish ownership of this chametz before the Isser begins at the halfway point of Erev Pesach. Because once it becomes Erev Pesach, you can't be mafkir it. Once it becomes 6 hours of Erev Pesach, as explained at length in Halacha. But if you did it earlier, early morning Erev Pesach, or the days before, you're mafkir the chametz, that should have worked. Even though that the hefker, that this idea only works min ha-Torah, we learn in the Gemara, from the pasuk, it shall not be seen to you. So from the word lacha, Chachamim learned shalcha, you're not allowed to see your own chametz in your possession. But you're allowed to see chametz that belongs to somebody else, or chametz that belongs to hefker, which means it belongs to nobody. But then the Chachamim decreed that bittul v'hefker should not suffice, and the chametz has to be destroyed totally, entirely. So we have a solution for that as well. In other words, the Rebbe is suggesting that they could have been mafkir the chametz, could have made it ownerless, and even though ownerless only covers the problem of Midairaisa, that Rabbanan still had a problem with hefker, we have a solution to that as well. We could do so, not only that it is the chametz in his heart, but it remains in his possession, which is a problem according to the Chachamim, as we'll see in a moment why. Nor by mafkir sein dem chametz, soll es herausnehmen von seinem Schuss und weglegen bis Rabbi hefker mamish. He can also take this chametz out of his domain, in a place where it's totally ownerless, albeit in an art was gain nit can mention. You might want to find a place that's not so populated, because otherwise someone will take it. But if you found a place that's not so populated, but it is a place, an alleyway, somewhere, a place that is ownerless, you can do that. And then take back ownership after Pesach. Was the Chelek damit is when bevorently beide time until die Woche der Chachamim Saken given als bittul v'hefker allein soll nicht sein genug. And if you do that, then both issues that the Chachamim had with hefker, which is why they said hefker is not enough, and mechira, selling, was instituted. But there's two reasons that Chachamim said. Both of those reasons will be addressed through the hefker if you take it out of your rishus, out of your domain. Aleph. The one issue that the Chachamim had was that bittul v'hefker is talib machshavtei shel ha'adam, that it depends on the person's mind. And the concern of the Chachamim was that the person may not do it sincerely. He may be mafkir it and say, okay, it's hefker, but if it's in his house, no one can take it. So it's not really, so it is hefker, but maybe he wasn't sincere about it, and he really retains in his mind ownership of it. Which is why he has to remove it from his domain. If it's out of his house, then it means that he didn't just do it in his heart, he did an action that actually removed the chametz from his possession. Other bays mitzad tam vala adam ragel b'chalashana b'chametz. Another reason is because a person is accustomed all year to eating chametz. And due to his habits, it's very easy to forget. So he's going to forget the fact that it's aser. And if it's going to remain in his possession, in his domain, in his house, in his place where he frequents on Pesach, he might by mistake come and eat it. So the Chachamim said that hefker is not good enough, and you have to, and you can't own it. And you can't own it, you have to sell it or something like that. But if it's not in his rishus, if he put it out in the street, then the chashash, the concern that he might come to eat it on Pesach is very, very minuscule. And therefore, if a person was mafkir it, and also removed it from his house and put it in the street, seemingly that should cover all of the bases, and that should have been a good solution to having the Rebbe Rashab not to have to eat this precious candy before Pesach. And it is found that very explicitly, the Rebbe refers over here to various different poskim. that it's lechatchila erased them in the chametz benushusu in a mafker zayin when aveklegen b'makom hefker lakel ulachar Pesach zeicha zayin in them, that it is totally permissible to make something hefker as long as you take it out of your house and put it into a public place, a place where everyone has access to it, and then if nobody touches it or takes it over Pesach, you can retake ownership of it after Pesach. It's a totally acceptable solution. And the Rebbe adds in the parentheses, Uki meduma, and I think, Shenimtza b'sipurei chaye kama chasidim, hanoyagim b'kabbalah shirayim, that it is found in the stories of some of the chasidim who have the custom to receive shirayim v'kayotze b'zeh from their Rebbe, they receive food from their Rebbe, shenogu ken, that this was their custom, that this is what they would do. They would make it hefker and put it out on the street, and then take it back after Yom Tov. Interestingly enough, the Rebbe uses the word uki meduma, which is not such a common word to the best of my knowledge, as well as the fact that there's no footnotes. There's no ha'aris to any such story. So, earlier there was a story in the ha'ara about selling the chametz, but about being mafkirit, the Rebbe says uki meduma, and that's good enough for us. So simply, the very simple reason why the Tzemach Tzedek did not take this path. Because even though we find various opinions that hold that you're allowed to make chametz hefker before there's mana isur, before the time that the prohibition begins, and place it into a makom hefker, even though you have in mind that you want to retake ownership of it after Pesach, aber mishara poiskim, from the rest of the poiskim, those who don't say that this is an acceptable approach. Un azay paskin der Alter Rebbe, and the Alter Rebbe paskin so very clearly in Shulchan Aruch that afilu hiniche b'makom hamufke lekel, even if he's putting it down in a place that is open to everyone, he has to be mafkir, he has to disown it entirely with his words, by saying leheve hefker ka'afrodara, and in his heart, it means he has to be sincere about it. And he should not have in mind, when making it hefker, that he wants to come back and retake ownership of it after Pesach. Because if he has that in mind, hefker gamur, it is not truly hefker. It's as if it is entirely his. The Alter Rebbe holds that this approach doesn't work. Even if it's placed in an ownerless space, and the person says it's totally hefker, he cannot have in mind to be able to go back after Pesach and take it back. Nochmer. And the Alter Rebbe writes even more than that. Chametz that was found in an ownerless place, which the Yid had put it there, thrown it there, before the 6th hour of Erev Pesach, which is when the Isser begins. Because he did not want to be over on Bal Yirah, Bal Yimotza, on the prohibition of seeing chametz in your possession. Shemuter lasis kein lechatchila, which is acceptable to do, it's permissible to do. Mikol mokim lachara Pesach asur lechaladam Yisrael lehanet mimenu. After Pesach, not only the owner, but no Yid, nobody is allowed to have any hana from this chametz after Pesach. The Alter Rebbe brings Shulchan Aruch that there's a concern that a person is not going to be mafkir b'leiv shalom. He's not, if he knows that he can get it back after Pesach, or if he knows another Yid can take it, then he's going to want to be mafkir it in a way that someone else should get from it, and the hefker is not real, it's not sincere, and therefore the Alter Rebbe paskins that not only is the owner not allowed to have in mind to take it back after Pesach, but he's not allowed to take it back after Pesach, and nobody else is either allowed to to derive benefit from it after Pesach. So therefore, this suggestion that the Rebbe gave, that you could be mafkirit and put it in an ownerless space, it might work for some of the Chasidim hanoyagim b'kabbalah shirayim, but in the Alter Rebbe Shulchan Aruch, it's very clear that it doesn't work. And now in Sif Daled, the Rebbe is going to say Oberfort. It could maybe it could still work in this specific scenario of the candies belonging to the Rebbe Rashab that he received from the Tzemach Tzedek. So the Shver zu sagen, das ist der Tam didn't done. It's difficult to say that this was the reason why the Tzemach Tzedek did not want to be mafkiret. In other words, we're trying to figure out why he made him eat it. So we tried to suggest that he felt the sale wouldn't work, but we said no, the sale would have worked. So we don't know why the Tzemach Tzedek didn't sell it. We tried to suggest why the Tzemach Tzedek didn't say to be mafkirit, and we just explained that according to the Alter Rebbe, the hefker doesn't work. But the Rebbe now goes back and says, no, that can't be a sufficient explanation here. Why? We're talking about candy. Most candies, or many candies, don't have chametz in them. It's sugar, it's other things like that. Even if there is chametz in it, maybe a corn syrup, or in those days they mixed in some wheat or something into the candy. He does not taruvis chametz from Kedem Pesach. It's a mixture of chametz. It's not 100% chametz. It's got to have a lot of other things in it to make it a candy, to make it sweet. But it might also have chametz in it, but it's a mixture of chametz, which chametz got mixed into it before Pesach, was dan bottled bereiv oder besamach. Und es nicht in dem kein bal yirah bal yimatzah mit der Eisral kopanim. And something that had chametz mixed into it before Pesach, it bottle. If there's less than a 60th, if there's less than the majority of chametz, then it's bottle. Which means to say, when we say chametz is asur b'mashu, that even one drop of chametz is a problem, that's on Pesach. If chas v'shalom on Pesach, a drop of chametz falls into a massive pot of food, the entire pot is asur because chametz is b'mashu. But that's only once the Zman HaYisr began. Before the Zman HaYisr, chametz is batal b'roiv, like every other Yisr, b'roiv or b'shishim. So the candy is Mida iraisa, at least, there's no Isser bal yirah bal yimatzah, because at best it's a taruvis of chametz, that a mixture of chametz that got bottled before Pesach. The oid das was I have helfen nicht is doch zu lieben tam was jet Mensch wird das eton gibt zu kennen haben von dem chametz nach Pesach. The reason why the Alter Rebbe holds that the hefker doesn't work is because of the concern that everyone's going to do this. Everyone's going to make a hefker, and then they're just going to take it back after Pesach, and it won't be sincere. In this case, the Rebbe Rashab had no intent to ever enjoy by eating the candy. He didn't want to eat it. He wanted to hold on to it. It was so precious. I feel he didn't want to sell it either. He just wanted to hold on to it. But das is not a suffix that Rabbanan canal. See the taruvus chametz the v'chal haben hefker beer. And if you combine the fact that the Rebbe Rashab had no intention of eating it or selling it, and the fact that it's a suffix that Rabbanan whether this even needs to be destroyed, especially this kind of scenario is an uncommon scenario that it should be a candy that he received from a Rebbe, and therefore it's holy, and he recognizes the holiness in it. Doesn't want to lose it. Ken sein as in der Fall, aber die Rabbanan Chelek die Geise given as other hefker soll nicht passig sein. It's even possible that we know that a gzeira of the Chachamim doesn't apply or wasn't actually instituted when it's a milsa de l'shchicha, when it's an uncommon occurrence, and this is an uncommon occurrence. So you have the fact that he didn't want to eat it or sell it. You have the fact that it's a suffix if even there's a iser over here because it's a taruvus of chametz. You have the fact that it's a milsa de l'shchicha. So even though Chachamim made a gzeira that hefker doesn't work by itself, but this is something that's uncommon, and possibly the Chachamim never made the gzeira in this case. So to say that the Tzemach Tzedek wanted him to eat it and not be mafkirit because the Alter Rebbe says that hefker doesn't work, not necessarily is a sufficient explanation. Because in this case, this might have been an exception to the rule for all these above mentioned reasons. And especially if you pile these reasons on top of each other. You have a taruvus of chametz, and you have the fact that he's not eating it after Pesach and he's not selling it after Pesach, and you have the fact that it's a milsa de l'shchicha. All of these things together, to say that hefker doesn't work is very questionable. So we're back to our question: why did the Tzemach Tzedek not advise the Rebbe Rashab to have the candies sold, or to have the candies be made hefker, and by putting it out in the street, and then you would cover all of your bases? And just a couple of more short nekudas before we get to the ultimate answer. We can't fragen auf der Galal Shak mit Ariana as the ganze Ding von Mechide hefker is nicht scheich und nicht dan. Wie bald es sich da wegen Chefetz von a Kotten, was kann nur keine sein mit das Acheres, aber nicht makne sein oder mafkir sein. So it's made very simple. Maybe it's a moot question. We're talking about a child, and a child, even if there is an opinion that a child can acquire something, a child cannot give something away, and a child can't make something hefker. The child is not considered mature enough that something that he gives or makes hefker is considered a valid gift or a valid hefker according to halacha. So maybe this is why the Tzemach Tzedek did not go into the whole selling and hefker, because it belongs to a child, and a child can't do it. That can't be the answer. Is their din as the mitzvah was gefint and matana was kriegt is a shel aviv, because a minor, a child, a small child that is dependent on his father's table, which means to say that it's being supported by his father, so anything that he finds or receives belongs to his father. So this whole discussion is not about the child, it's about the father. And therefore the question remains, why did the father of the child not sell it or not make it hefker? The high time is move on. And from this reason, it's also understood as from the Sipur Anal kemenit medayig zayin as leid das Tzemach Tzedek as a cotton muzer bal yira bal yimotze unchayiv lafrishim is that we can't derive from this story that the Tzemach Tzedek holds that a minor has the obligation of bal yira bal yimotze, and there's an obligation on the parents to make sure that the child is not over, which we might have thought from seeing the fact that the Tzemach Tzedek made him eat the candies. Or that if the chametz was owned by a child, let's say there was no father, let's say there was the chas v'shalom, let's say there wasn't the case of samach al shulchan aviv, and the cotton held on to the chametz over Pesach, that it would be aser ba'anoah. We can't derive anything to do with a cotton here. But that's the fact that it wasn't the case of certain chametz. As we mentioned earlier, the candy was owned by the father who was an adult, and that all the halachas are as if it belongs to an adult, and therefore we can't derive any halacha with regards to the chametz belonging to a cotton, because in this case, clearly, even though we're talking about the Rebbe Rashab who had the candies, but the obligations that we talk about and the ownership of it was in the hands of his father, the Rebbe Maharash. And in general, it's questionable if we could learn from the story anything with regards to what the Tzemach Tzedek holds, or what the halacha would say with regards to the chametz, with regards to a regular person. Because number one, we're talking about chametz d'Rabbanan, certainly not chametz d'Oraisa. It might even be a suffix if it's chametz in the first place. It could have just been sugar water, and it has no chametz in it. And it's an inyan meyuchad d'loishchiach, and it was something unique that was uncommon. So not necessarily can you apply that to some other case. And also the genashtub was matmahader given betachlis v'chulu. It was a home in which the hidur was very, very, very strong, and therefore not necessarily is this the halacha. It could be that Tzemach Tzedek did something as an extra hidur, but we can't necessarily apply this to the halacha of chametz. So therefore, we're talking about a very specific situation, very unique situation, but we have to understand why did the Tzemach Tzedek require the Rebbe Rashab to eat the candy and not to sell it, as we said earlier in the Sikha, that the sale, because according to the Alter Rebbe, it's a Mechira Gemura, should have worked in order to cover for Chametz for Pesach, and then obviously you can buy it back after Pesach. Hefker would have worked, because even though hefker usually doesn't work, but in this case it's a safek chametz, and it's a chametz d'Rabbanan, and it's a milzad l'shchicha, as we said at length in this last seif. So hefker should have been able to work, and yet we find that Tzemach Tzedek required the young boy to eat the candy and not rely on selling it or making it hefker, and we have to understand why. And in Sif Hey, the Rebbe is going to begin the explanation. Wenn wir das verstehen, behaktim, as al pisha shmua mechsidim. We'll understand this by first introducing that which we have heard from Chasidim. As the Rebbe points out in Order 36, that I didn't hear anything with this regard from the Frierdiker Rebbe, but nevertheless, this is a shmua me Chasidim. This is something that has been heard and passed down from Chasidim. Is the hanagah from Chasidim Rabbi Sein and Neseinu given al derech hanal. The hanagah, the conduct of the Chasidim of our Rebbes were similar to this conduct that Tzemach Tzedek advised the Rebbe Rashab. When they received food or drink from the Rebbe, das Nidya can't help them to Pesach, and they couldn't hold on to it over Pesach because it was chametz, or had chametz in it. Aber das nicht verkauft in chametz, it was not sold in the chametz, nor mod das aufgegessen oder ausgetrunken for Pesach. Rather, they would eat it or drink it before Pesach. Und der Tam der Funja Shleimer Bepashtos, and the reason is very simple. It says, Heipich kavod Rabbi zu nehmen seine Shirayim v'kayetze b'zeh. It is contrary to the kavod of the Rebbe to take something that you received from the Rebbe, that came from the Rebbe. Ubefrat was ihm gegeben, especially if the Rebbe gave it to him, und sie weggeben oder verkaufen zu einer Yehudi, and to give it away or to sell it to a guy. Something that you received from the Rebbe, or even something that came from the Rebbe, even if you didn't receive it with your own hand, something that, and to then give it away to an Eina Yehudi, this is something that's not bakavadik, and therefore the minik Chasidim was to not do so. It would be better to eat it and drink it before Pesach and not have it after Pesach than to give it away to an Eina Yehudi. Nachmer, in the next paragraph, the Rebbe is going to introduce a chakira, a debate, a question, and suggest that it's possible that when you sell it to a goy, not only is it not bakavadik, but you're actually removing the kedusha, the holiness in it, by transferring the ownership. In a case where the food or the like is being sold or being transferred into the possession of a goy, is tarachiyun. We have a question. After the yid buys it back, does the holiness, the prior holiness of the tzaddik, is it retained in the food? And in Sivav, we're going to explore this according to a chakira in the Rogatchover. Seemingly, we can say that the answer to this question, does the food retain its holiness even after it was sold or not? It could depend on what is the definition of the prohibition of chametz on Pesach. From the Rogatchover, and as it is brought in this Safnas Paneach, from the Rogatchover going, see, the Isser Chametz is atayar. Is the Isser of Chametz a description or a form? An expression of the food, the fact that the food is Chametz. Or there Isser is Chol ala etzem. Or is the Isser on the very essence of the food? This is very similar, and actually we're going to see even more similarity with the Sicha we learned last week in Parshas Ve'era. Sicha Hey, how deep does the Isser go? Does the Isser go to the form of the Chametz, as the Chametz is presented in something that is edible, or at least something that could give benefit? Or does the Chametz go, the Isser go as deep as the food, as the etzem, the essence of the food? Das ist totally in den Machlekes von Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Shimon. Rabbi Chavar explains that this chakira, this debate would follow the Machlekes of Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Shimon in the Gemara in Pesachim. If chametz after Pesach, chametz that was owned by a yid over Pesach, and then Pesach passes, is this chametz aser b'hanoah? Does the iser remain even after Pesach or not? And the Rogatchover says as follows: the man is sfirulei aser, the one who holds that the chametz is aser even after Pesach, sfirulei deha iser chal alo etzem. He holds that the iser goes on the essence of the food, and therefore once the essence of the food became aser, there is no way for it to become mutter again. Uman disfirulei mutter, and the opinion that says that the chametz that the chametz is mutter after Pesach, permissible. Sfirulei, he holds the le'avarak toyar. The prohibition of chametz only reaches to the expression, to the form of the food, as it presents as something of chametz. But once Pesach passes, the fact that this is chametz, it goes away because Pesach ended. And therefore, they hold that after Pesach is mutter, because the chametz, the is not on the etzem. Didn't affect the essence of the food, it only affected the food as it presented as chametz. Once chametz doesn't exist anymore, the food now becomes mutter. Und das ist verbunden mit der Machlekes von Rabbi Yehuda mit der Chachamim. And this will also connect with the very same Machlekes of Rabbi Yehuda and Chachamim that we learned last week with regards to how to burn chametz, or how to destroy chametz, rather. Rabbi Yehuda holds the only way to destroy chametz is by burning it. The Chachamim hold that you can crumble it up and blow it in the wind or throw it into the ocean. So this machlekes would follow the same question. The Chachamim halten as that Isser chametz is beteuer von der Sach. The Chachamim hold that the Isser of chametz is in the form of it. Is the Libri genug mefarer v'zeder l'rocha mata layam was demold that bottle der teuer von chametz. So it's enough to crumble it and to blow it in the wind or to throw it in the ocean, because then it loses the form of chametz. So you can't eat it, you can't benefit from it. Hagamas is verbleibt dem etzem chametz, even though the essence of the chametz remains. It's crumbs, but it's still there. It doesn't matter, because since according to the Chachamim, the Isser of the chametz only goes as deep as the form of it. Therefore, once you crumble it up and blow it in the wind, it's good enough. Whereas Rabbi Yehuda holds that the Isser of chametz goes on the etzem, on the essence of the food, and therefore the chametz has to be burned as a bottle, and then etzem it sees to totally get rid of the existence of the chametz. Not only the form of it, the possibility of eating it or benefiting from it, but the very existence has to be gotten rid of. So from this we see another expression, another relevance of this machlekes, how deep the Isser goes. Does the Isser go as deep of the form of the chametz, or does the Isser go as deep as the essence of the chametz? So according to this, we could say, we can now apply this reasoning also to the question of whether the kedusha could be retained in the holiness, if the holiness could be retained in the food that was sold to the guy. If we hold like Rabbi Yehuda that the essence of the Isser goes as deep as the essence, the very essence of the food, which means that when I'm selling it to the guy, I have to include also the essence of selling everything. Therefore, there remains nothing that's still in the possession of the owner. Everything is being sold to the goy, and therefore there's nothing into which or onto which the kedusha can hold itself. The holiness has nothing to hold on to, because the entire thing, even the very essence of it, was sold off to the goy. But if you learn that it's only the form of it, which is extraneous to the very essence of it, which then you can say that what you're selling, since the only reason you're selling it is because of Bal Yirah, Bal Yimatzeh, and therefore, in order to not be over by Yirah Bal Yimatzeh, you only have to sell the toyar, the form of it. But you could retain ownership, so to speak, of the essence of it. And therefore, in the essence, which is remaining in the bailus ala etzem from the menaisen, because the giver, the original owner, owns the etzem, and therefore the etzem has the kedusha akedemes, but svirt dem etzem from dem zach, because the kedusha is in the essence of it, and therefore the kedusha never gets lost. So the same argument that we had with regards to chametz lachar Pesach, or with regards to how to destroy chametz, we can have the same argument with regards to the kedusha of the Rebbe that is in the food. If you say it's chal ala etzem, then you're selling everything, including the etzem, and therefore there's no kedusha left. There's nowhere for the kedusha to hold on to. But if you're only selling the toyar, you're only selling the form. Then, if you're only selling the form, then you can hold on to the core, so you can hold on to the essence. And if you're holding on to the essence, then the kedusha remains in the essence, and the chametz is sold, and you're not over on Bal Yirah, Bal Yimatzeh, but at the same time, you can still hold on to the kedusha. Since al pi halacha we follow like Reb Shimon, the chametz really is mutter, which means we're only going as deep as the toyer, as the form. Are you going to say we know now that chametz is asur b'hanoah, and the isur is nor als knas? Today, the reason why we say that chametz she'avar alav Pesach is aser ba'anoah is not because inherently it's aser, because it's a knas, it's a fine that the Chachamim gave the person for keeping chametz in his possession. With regards to chametz, the minig, it's a custom, the fact that we burn the chametz. Aber the halacha is chachamim, as is genug mefarer b'zeder l'ruach oy mati layam. It's enough. Pi halacha, we pass like the chachamim that to crumble it up and to throw it into the wind, or to throw it into the ocean suffices. Which means that in both of these machlekesin la halacha we're paskening that the isser of chametz only reaches the toyar, only reaches the form of the chametz, but the essence of the chametz is not aser, and therefore the yid could retain ownership of it. This would lead us to conclude as es macht nit ois zu verkaufen die shirayim von atzadik zum einer Yehudi. It doesn't matter if you sold the shirayim to the Einer Yehudi, weil noch them can verbleiben in them the kedusha tzaddik, because since you're holding on to the etzem of the chametz, the kedusha has something to hold on to, and if the kedusha has something to hold on to, then that you don't lose anything by selling it to the guy, and when you buy it back, you receive back the kedusha that you had originally. So in Siv Zayin, the Rebbe is going to say that doesn't work like that, even though it seems that you can break down the toyar and the etzem, but if you go back to what we said in the beginning of the Sikha, that according to the Alter Rebbe, the mechira is a mechira gemura, it is a total and complete sale, then you can't really differentiate between the toyar and the etzem when it comes to the sale. Since even though it's true, the whole purpose of the sale is to not be over, and therefore technically you only have to sell the toyar, the form of the chametz, but not the essence of the chametz, of the food. But nevertheless, most of the poskim hold, like we mentioned earlier in the Sikha, that this is a total sale, a complete sale. Which means the very essence of the chametz belongs to the goy in a total and complete kinyan, even a kinyan that is acceptable midiraisa. Especially like we said earlier, according to the takana of the Alter Rebbe, that an art of kabbalah is included. So this is an entirely legitimate sale. And so much so that after Pesach, the goy can sell it to a different yid. That's how much ownership he has of it. Das heißt, nicht blaze as chusishtabshus, oder akinyan blaze nem ter von der Sache, which means not only does the guy have the right of usage, or not only does he have ownership in the form of it, no, the etzem zach belongs to him, the very thing itself belongs to him. Is move on, and now we understand was Chassidim haben nicht gewollt verkaufen hat Michael was mit Kabel gewen von Rebbe zu einer Yehudi. The fact that the Chassidim did not want to sell a piece of food that they received from the Rebbe to a Einer Yehudi, to a guy. Not only is this contrary to the covet of his Rebbe, to give away something that you received from the tzaddik to someone who receives his chayis, his sustenance, his life force from the deepest, most klipa. But it's more than that. What you're doing is you're deliberately removing the ownership of kedusha that previously was on this food, and by selling it, you're removing this ownership. And that is something that nobody would want to do. So this answers the question why the Hasidim, and therefore the Tzemach Tzedek, they did not want to sell this chametz, because since it was something that was a davar shebekdusha, and selling it removes the kedusha from it, therefore it was not. Besides the fact that it was heipech hakavid of the Rebbe, it also was removed the kedusha. In Siv Ches, we're going to discuss the idea of possibly making it hefker. We can explain why they didn't, based on all of this, we can explain why not only did they not sell it, they didn't either make it hefker, they wouldn't either relinquish their ownership and make it hefker when it was something that was received from a tzaddik. And in order for this, we have to explore a little bit the idea of hefker. The Geder von Hefker, Dr. Ragachover, the concept of Hefker can be explained in two ways. Either Zi der Uftu von Hefker is, as der Balabais sich mesalik von der Sach, was is mafkir und es gehört nicht zu keinem. One is that the Balabais, the owner, removes himself from the ownership of this, and now it becomes totally ownerless. Nobody owns it. Oder as durch der Mafkir sein bakumen alle Menschen as Chus v'kinyan and Davran Nifker. Another way of presenting this is that when a person makes it hefker, everybody receives ownership or potential ownership in this object. So does it now have no owners, or does it now have 8 billion owners? Those are the two ways. And with this chakira, with this debate, the Ragachover explains the machlekes in the Gemara. Just to explain what the machlekes is about, I'll just say this is based on a Mishnah in Beya. It's talking about Tchum Shabbos. Tchum Shabbos applies also on Yontif, which means that wherever a person is a Kaina Shvisa, wherever a person dwells at the beginning of Shabbos, he's not allowed to go more than 2,000 amis from there. Now, obviously, this means if he's in a city, he can go to the outskirts of the city plus 2,000 amis. But let's say, for example, he's outside of a city, he can only go 2,000 amis from where he is. And unless he makes an Eid of Tchubin, he designates certain spaces to which are considered part of his dwelling, then he can go to those places and then an additional 2,000 amis, which is the general concept of Tchumin. This applies on Shabbos and on Yom Tov as well. Another important detail is that Tchum applies not just to the individual person, but also to his possessions. So if a person owns something, let's say a water bottle. A person has a bottle of water, so the bottle of water is not allowed to be taken outside of the tchum of wherever its owner, whichever tchum applies to the owner. So for example, let's say even if another person came, and his tchum was a little bit further away and took this water bottle, nevertheless, even though the other person has a further tchum, he can walk further away, but the water bottle has to remain within the tchum of the original owner. And now the machlekes that we're going to have is in a case where person A filled up a water bottle from a well of hefker, and he filled it up for another person. And let's learn it inside. Somebody drew water from a well that was hefker, yomtiv, a well or a ditch filled with water. So lieb sein Chaver, and he did this for a friend, person B. Sagt Rav Nachman, as der Tchum wird gerechnet, keragle mishen ismalolei. According to Rav Nachman, the Tchum is counted by the feet, meaning by the position of the person for whom the water was drawn. Das heißt, the Alpayim Amma from Makom Shvisa, the 2,000 Amas, from the place where they settled for Shabbos, wird gerechnet von dem Ort, wo es gefindt sich der Verwemmen hat geschöpfte Wasser. It starts from the place where the person for whom the water was drawn it finds himself. Rav Shesha sagt, as merechnet es kiragle amemali. Rav Shesha says that it's counted from the feet of the person who drew the water. As merechnet the alpayim amma from the memale, that we're counting the 2,000 amas not from the place where the person for whom the water was drawn, rather from the place where the person who actually drew the water from wherever he is, from wherever his shvisa was on Shabbos, 2,000 amas. Just to explain what I just said, if the boyer is 500 amas away from where the person settled on Shabbos, he's allowed to go there because it's less than 2,000 amas, and he can come back. The radius of this water is 2,000 amas from where the person was at the beginning of Shabbos. When the Gemara asks, what's this machlekes? What's it about? And the Gemara answers, what opinion holds that this is a boyer of hefker? The boyer doesn't belong to anyone. And the other opinion holds that the boyer belongs to partners. So let's explain what does this mean. Is the Ragachover Mavar that Ragachover explains? As Beida halten as the boyer is hefker. Both opinions hold that we're talking about a boyer of hefker. So what is the machlekes? What does it mean? Mar savar bira de hefkeirahu. Mar savar bira de shutf. What does it mean? If they both agree it's hefker. Rav Nachman halt as the geder von hefker is as alle haben in as chus v'chelik. Rav Nachman holds that hefker means that everybody has a part ownership in it. Euch der farvemen hat geschabt die Wasser, including the person for whom the water was drawn. Der Far hat dem din von abide de shutfi. Who? Therefore, it has the din of a boyer, of a well that belongs to partners. Because since everybody has part ownership in it, so therefore the person for whom the water was filled has a part ownership in this well. And therefore, when the person draws the water for him, immediately the water belongs to the other person, the person for whom it's being drawn, because he was already a part owner in the well. And therefore, it becomes his possession, and therefore the tchum is based on him. Rav Sheshes holds, however, Hefker meint, ados gehert nit zu keinem. Hefker means it belongs to nobody, not to everybody, but to nobody. Umemele kann der normale Zeiche sein für sich ein Scham, aber nicht Zeiche sein die Wasser für uns Feten. So therefore, since it belongs to nobody, the only way to draw water for someone else is by first taking ownership of the water for the person who's drawing it, and then to give it away to the other person. But therefore, since the person who's drawing the water took ownership of it first, therefore it becomes his possession, and the tchum is based on him. If the other person has a part ownership in it, so then he could take ownership of it right away without it going through the person who's drawing it, and therefore it becomes the possession of the second person, and the tchum is based on the second person. But according to Rav Sheshes, that this boy belongs to nobody, then the only way to take ownership of it, of the water, is that the person who's filling it up has to first be zoiche min ha'hefker. First has to take ownership of it, and then it becomes his possession. And once it becomes his possession, then the tchum is based on that, and that can't change on Yontif. So from this, we understand that there's a very serious debate, a very serious two ways of looking at this. What does hefker mean? Does hefker mean that it belongs to everybody, or does hefker mean that it belongs to nobody? Only beide svaris in hefker is movement in the dan. But whichever direction, whichever perspective you have on hefker, we'll understand as we apply this to the case of the candies and why it cannot be made hefker. Later, svara as hefker peilt that das gehört zu alamin. According to the svara, that hefker means that it belongs to everybody. Is moving with pastors of us did gewollt mafker an die Schreimanau. It's self-understood why they didn't want to make it hefker. Umitzad demselben tam wie bei Mechiret Shein Yehudi, for the same reason that we don't want to sell it. Warum demult wohl das balein zu alle goyim von der Welt, because then it belongs to everybody. Befragt as bepashtu seinen sich Iden, was ein Lützener bekommen zu Pesach, misalik von Vakum mit dem Schuss in dem hefker. And because the Yidden are not going to want to be zoiche in it. They're not going to want to take ownership of it because it's chametz on Pesach. So you're leaving it not to everybody in the world. You're leaving it specifically to the goyim of the world. Und das ist hepech kved Rabbi Kanal, which is contrary to the kavod of his Rebbe. Und in ein Prat ist das mafke sein noch ärger. Here the Rebbe says that it might be even worse. Hefker might make it worse than selling it. In this detail, I mean, on the one hand, when you sell it, you're actually, the other person's taking ownership of it. When you make it hefker, nobody actually took ownership of it. Yet. So in that way, hefker is not as bad. But in a certain detail, hefker is worse. If he's selling it to someone, he could choose who he sells it to. So he can choose a guy that is a righteous one. Which the Rambam says that Chasidim, the righteous amongst the Gentiles, amongst the nations of the world, has a portion in the world to come. Especially a guy who is actually helping the Yid, that he should not transgress the prohibition of Chametz on Pesach, that in itself is an act of kindness, is an act of righteousness. So at least it's not such a disrespect, at least within the outside world, you're choosing someone who's Chasidim Yisraelim. But if you're making it hefker to the whole world, and you're giving ownership to everybody, gehört das zu alle goyim, euch nicht Chasidim Yisraelim, und damit euch nachmer bestimmt ist Kavod Rabbi. You're now placing this into the potential possession of every single person, even those that are not upright and those that are not righteous, which is even more contrary to the Kavod of his Rebbe. And even if you're going to follow the opinion that hefker means it becomes totally ownerless and nobody owns it, is move on, it's still understood. To take something so precious, something that's holy that he received from his Rebbe, und das beleib shalom mevatel sein und überlassen das makom hefker and wholeheartedly lose ownership of it and place it in an open space, is eichan inyan von hepech hakavod, das weiß auf hepech hashivas. It's also a form of hepech hakavod. It's also a form of disrespect because it means it's not important to you. If you could take this food item or this drink, and you could just put it out in the street and say anybody can take it, it doesn't belong to anybody, it shows that it's not important to you. And that also is a form of Hepech HaKavod. Umihai time, and now let's conclude. As anstatt dem as die Zucker sollen gehören zu einer Yehudi oder sein Hefker, and therefore the Tzemach Tzedek made this effort that instead of taking these candies and giving them and selling them to someone who's not Jewish, or to make them Hefker, so they sein Eidnikol Kvekdushes ad Murmur Hashab uf essen und sie sollen werden Damu Barsa Kipsorei. It is so much better that his grandson, the Rebbe Hashab, should eat the candies and make them part of his flesh, make them part of him, and therefore he will then internalize the holiness that exists in these candies. And finally, a lesson. From all of this, we can even have a greater, a more incredible lesson in the great effort and how we have to do the chinuch, the education of our children. Wie bald as die Zuckerkis seine gewinn beim Rebbe mit Rashab Nishmas Eden, as they tire. Wie bald as die Zuckerkis seine gewinn beim Rebbe Nishmas Eden, as they tire. Since these candies were so precious to the Rebbe Rashab, as libdemot is gehalten ganz bei sich b'reshusei, which is why he held them whole. He didn't eat them. He didn't do anything with them. He held on to them. I feel he even forewent the fact that it should become part of him by eating it. And there's no prohibition to sell it, and there's no prohibition to be mafkir, as we learned in the beginning of the Sikha. That Rebbe made it very clear. The mechira is a mechira gemura. Even though he wants to take it after Pesach, it's still a complete sale, and therefore there's no problem of selling it. Even with regards to the hefker, if you take it and you put it outside, and you keep in mind that it's not really chametz, or it's at worst it's a tarufis chametz, and it's an uncommon thing. And what did we miss? And he's not going to eat it or sell it after Yontif, then it's not a problem to be mafkir it. So halachically, it was a permissible thing. They should have done it for him. They should have sold it or been mafkir for the child. So then he would have been able to hold on to it after Pesach. And it would have constantly reminded him and inspired him of the holiness of the special moment when he was inducted into Cheder. And if you're going to ask that on a deeper level, the Kedusha was removed and temporarily was brought into the possession of a non-Yid, he was a 3-year-old child and it gave Wusterfun, and he didn't know about this. At 3 years old, he wouldn't have understood the issue that it was lost some of the holiness by the child. He wouldn't have known the difference. Nor does that mean, so the question is, why, for the sake of the child, sell it or be mafkir it, and that way the child can keep it for longer. Nor does that mean gedel ishtadlus in inyan chinuch. From this we see the incredible effort that's necessary when it comes to chinuch. Not only if we're talking about actual halacha as it is midiraisa midirabanan. Afilu in a hidur mitzvah, not even in a hidur mitzvah. Even when it comes to a minig, to a custom, and something that Chassidim do, we have to invest to educate our children in this way. And it has to be truthful. It has to be done with integrity. And not only when it's easy. Even when you're doing something that on the level of this child, it's Mesidus Nefesh or Mesidus Haratzin. You're forcing him to do something that he doesn't want to do. Nevertheless, for the sake of the chinuch of the child, and for the sake of the integrity of the chinuch of the child, it has to be done. And there are several stories that we find with regards to the chinuch of the Frierdiker Rebbe, that also, even though it was difficult, but nevertheless it was done because it was the right thing to do. I don't know which stories the Rebbe is referring to specifically, but in the Sichos of the Frierdiker Rebbe about his childhood, there are a number of different stories. One of them, to give an example, is the story that the Frierdiker Rebbe, as a child, fell asleep during a Farbrengen on Sukkot. The Chassidim were Farbrengen. Obviously, the Rebbe Rashab was there, and he was a little boy, and he fell asleep. So the Rebbitzin, his mother, came in to carry him into the house and put him into his bed. So the Rebbe Rashab said, no, leave him here. Let him sleep amongst the Farbrengen. So the Rebbitzin, the Rebbitzin of the Rebbe Rashab, the mother of the child, said to the Rebbe Rashab, what's with Kirachim of Albanim? It doesn't say Kirachim aim, like the mercy of a mother on a child. It says Kirachim of Albanim. So where is the father's mercy where it's cold? It was in Russia and it was cold. And the child was tired, obviously. Where is the mercy of the father? And the Rebbe Rashab said, this is Kirachim of Albanim. This is the true mercy of the father, that he makes sure that the child sleeps in the environment of the Farbrengen of Chassidim and of the Rebbe Rashab. So we see an example. I don't know if this is the example that Rebbe is referring to, but we see an example of the chinuch of the Frierdiker Rebbe, that it wasn't always easy, but it was honest and authentic. And then we're able to train the child, not only to change his natural midos, but to change the nature of his midos, as it's explained in the Sichos and the Iglis of the Frierdiker Rebbe, what the difference is. And even though this is an approach of chinuch that is being said about unique individuals, the Rabbeim, nevertheless, since this was revealed to us, regular people, everybody, and it's a lesson for each and every one of us. As the Frierdiker Rebbe himself concludes in that Sicha, and this is the type of chinuch that we have to have. So even though it's difficult, and even though it was said about a Rebbe, but once we know about it, then we now have to learn from it and how to educate our children. And the kayach comes from the Rabbeim, which the body follows the head. So the Rebbe gives us kayach to be able to do chinuch in this way, to go in their ways, and to follow the paths that they have taught us for eternity. And with this, we finish the Sicha of Shevat, and with this we finish 5 volumes. Krachim Tezvav, Tezayin, Yudzayin, Yudches, Brich Rachamona Desayon. Thank the Eibishter for this incredible accomplishment. May the Eibishter give us keiches to be able to go on and continue to learn the Rebbe Sichos, to live with the Rebbe, Be'ercheyem, Be'ercheseyem, U'bedarkeyem Asher Herunu, Netzach Selavoed.